Ah, the early days of the Winter Olympics, like a toddler on a pair of wobbly skates, ever so earnest yet hilariously unpredictable. These nascent games stumbled onto the world stage in 1924 with the kind of enthusiasm only a pile of fresh snow could inspire. But as we tucked ourselves into a world blanketed with ice and ambition, did you know that women's figure skating teetered on the brink of a very different fate? In those days, women's figure skating wasn't merely a battle against gravity, it was a graceful protest against societal norms. Imagine it, the roaring 20s, flapper dresses causing a scandal with their knee-high hemlines, and the audacious bob-cut hairdos threatening to cause fainting spells. Now, place those trailblazing women on ice. Oh, the delightful chaos. Our story takes us to the crisp, frosty air of Chamonix, France, where the first Winter Olympics unfolded like a pristine yet slightly frostbitten piece of origami. Among the athletes were a few courageous women ready to dazzle spectators with their elegant spins and glittering performances. Women like Sonja Henie, the Norwegian ice princess whose skating style combined the elegance of a swan with the occasional and equally elegant banana peel slip. But the chilly winds of change were not to be dismissed as easily as stray snowflakes. Women in sports were a contentious topic, and many thought they'd be far better suited with knitting needles rather than ice skates. Oh, the irony. Knitting perhaps being the only thing more perilous than icy pirouetting, given the potential of tangled yarn and stabbed egos. Our heroines glided on the rink, each twist and twirl a silent argument that women belonged there. Figure skating was a masquerade ball, secretly governed by judges' frowns and headshakes. Judges, notorious for their sternness, could disapprove with such power that one could physically feel a lower score looming overhead, as if plummeting with the force of a misplaced triple axel. Nevertheless, the ladies of the rink knew that the best way to disarm a critic was with a well-timed spin, or, in Sonja's case, a charming smile that would melt any icy disposition. Sonja, young and sprightly, was just 11 that year. Imagine a pint-sized ice sprite buzzing around those taller, more serious competitors like a cheeky bumblebee. As the skaters glided through the frosty air of Chamonix, their presence alone negotiated the sport's future. Their skates carved lines into the ice, each figure a testament to resilience and tenacity, rather like etching a hopeful future into the solid ground. In the end, their determination won the day, although not without laughter and a few spectacular thuds. Figure skating grew, blossoming like the first spring crocus after winter, a silent shout of resplendent color on cold white ground. Women's participation expanded, and the world embraced the enchanting scene of lace and ice, perfectly spun tales telling of forgotten winters. If these stories help you drift off, please subscribe to the channel. It would mean the world to me. And before you fully fade into dreamland, I would love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there. And so, dear listener, much like Sonja spiraling towards history, let your thoughts spiral into dreams. As the gentle pull of sleep beckons, imagine the cold air of the rink giving way to a warmer story. A story we will unfold, one chapter at a time. Sweet dreams await, where the pirouettes of winter rinks turn into the soft dance of sleep's embrace. The year was 1924, nestled gently in the heart of the roaring 20s, a time when flapper dresses were on the rise and silent films dared to defy the quietude of history. But amid this fervor of novelty, a curious assembly of events was unfolding in the frosty embrace of Chamonix, France. Here, on the icy stage of what was to become the first Winter Olympics, a fresh and shimmering spectacle was set to capture the imagination of the world. Women's figure skating. Picture this: the town of Chamonix, a quaint retreat surrounded by the majestic Alps, was cloaked in a thick layer of snow, so quintessentially picturesque it likely inspired Bob Ross himself. In this wonderland, a handful of determined women were lacing up their skates, trembling perhaps not from the cold, but the thrilling prospect of making history single axles at a time. Athletes like Sonja Henie of Norway, who at just 11 years old was more concerned with perfecting her salchow than utilizing the power of pesky things like a driving license or even legal voting rights, were among the intrepid few. Imagine the serenity of the rink broken only by the sound of Hanie's blade slicing through ice as her pigtails barely found the balance between elegant and aerodynamic. However, let us not skate too quickly ahead. In 1924, the concept of women whirling around ice in sequined attire was still relatively new and, much like jazz, viewed as slightly scandalous by the more mustachioed members of society. Some must have wondered if ladies twirling on ice was on par with asking cats to tap dance. Delightful, yet unwarranted. Despite the suffragette victory of 1920 in the United States, women's sports were often cornered into the delicate, fluffy pillows of societal skepticism. Could women genuinely partake in competitive sports without compromising their delicate sensibilities? These were the kinds of questions being humorously pondered by armchair philosophers of the era. But back to our brave skaters in Chamonix. The competition swirled into life under the crisp, argent skies. The rink, a pristine expanse, quickly became an arena where elegance danced with gravity and where air temperatures occasionally rivaled the reception women's sports often received at that time. As the young Sonja Henie took to the ice, her determination was as unyielding as the alpine slopes surrounding her. Her petite frame cut graceful arcs through criticism and prejudice, an understated rebellion on skates. As the competition unfolded, it wasn't just Henie who glittered on the ice. Other figures emerged, such as Herma Sabo of Austria, whose elegant artistry was apt to convert skeptics with mere flicks of her ankles. Szabo, a doyen of the ice, swirled through skeptical hearts like a winter breeze, subtle yet utterly transformative. Yet for every graceful twirl, the Winter Games faced their own pirouettes of uncertainty. Administrative gaffes and fickle funding left the future of women's figure skating and the new Winter Olympics themselves in a precarious balance. Each wobbly financial footing mirrored the uneasily maintained elegance on the ice. It was a juggling act of aspirations, poised delicately on a budgetary tightrope, one false move away from plunging into the oblivion of what could have been. But just as the snow began to soften under the warming blur of spring, so sacred too did hearts. The world, captivated by the tapestry of talent unfurling in Chamonix, began to thaw in its reception of women's figure skating, tentative applause turning into earnest cheers. The very notion of women pirouetting beside men became less an oddity and more a norm, gently tugging history's course toward a more inclusive future. Indeed, as night descended over the Alps, the achievements of these women shimmered beneath the moonlight, their graceful strides echoing through the annals of time. The ice rink, so recently the exclusive dominion of men, had opened its frozen arms to the elegance and tenacity of women. And in those quiet, snowy embraces of 1924, women's figure skating found not just its footing but its wings. As the soft alpine winds whispered sweet lullabies across sleepy snowcaps, the world settled into a hopeful slumber, dreaming of a future where everyone who dared could dance on ice, each step a frosted testament of change and tenacity. The smooth transition between the frost of tradition and the warmth of progress was as gentle and inevitable as the dawning of the next chapter. The story of how women's Olympic figure skating almost didn't survive inevitably touches upon an eventual question. How did such a graceful sport once find itself skating on the thinnest of competitive ice? If you listen closely, you might just hear the gentle swoosh of skaters past gliding across the bygone rinks of winter's history, some caught in a dizzying, exquisitely choreographed spiral of bureaucracy, and perhaps a few hastily arranged snowballs. In today's world, women twirl with airborne elegance under the dazzling lights of figure skating, bedazzling audiences with their spins, jumps, and quads. Yet, let us whisper back to a time when the very survival of their slippery artistry hung in suspenseful balance. This tale finds its feet, skates, and general footing in the early 20th century, a time when figure skating itself became an official discipline of the Winter Olympics, even though the cry of "ladies singles" was met with a raised eyebrow or two. In the early 1900s, the lack of women's competitive inclusion was justified by assumptions as rigid as the frozen ponds where hopeful figure skaters first carved their talent. Quite often, these assumptions stumbled upon the misconceptions that women lacked the strength and endurance for such athletic finesse, an irony not lost on today's skaters who accomplish mind-bending moves with the gentleness of a winter's breeze, turning critique into trophies. But allow your mind to soften to that period when women finally twirled their way into the Olympic arena during the 1908 London Games, albeit not quite with a sharp-edged acceptance they deserved. Picture a rink thawing into the official schedule. Such was the inclusion of women's skating. The inclusion wasn't quite a broad open door, but more of an "I didn't know you were here" acknowledgement. Looking back, the scene could have resembled a charmingly awkward open house. Polite gasps and underprepared gentlemen figuring out what to do with these newly minted athletic guests. And what guests they were. Among these trailblazers was a certain Miss Madge Sayers from England, whose fluid grace and convincing charm on the ice began to melt preconceptions faster than a spring thaw. Let's take a moment to imagine Miss Sayers gliding, her blade weaving elegantly composed poetry into the once and future ice of women's figure skating. Her presence alone was a delightful oxymoron of frozen waters spirited to life, convincing the naysayers one Lutz at a time. This astonishing feat, however, did not immediately guarantee women's skating immunity from future exclusion. Our stories do tend to have some dilemmas, after all. You see, the challenge was that in the world of competitive sports, women's accomplishments were often sidelined with a brusque, "Very nice, dear, now back to the serious events." Thankfully, the foreboding shadows of dormancy never truly descended upon women's figure skating. A quirky conundrum occurred. The growing popularity of the sport among audiences seemed to have a thawing effect on its skeptics. Silent cheers wandered through crowds like quiet winds of change, threading through wintry air during exhibitions. It appeared that the artistry and daring in those spectacular jumps and spellbinding spins managed, in splendidly convoluted ways, to rally a parade of interest among the Olympic visionaries. Piecing together the puzzle of Olympic inclusion was akin to attempting a triple axel, daring, precarious, and magnificently graceful when completed in one piece. Skating eventually found its place, albeit not without a few scuffs and scratches along the way. Our heroines of the ice persevered like snowdrops, pushing their way through winter snow, heralding the inevitability of change. Change which, perhaps, gave rise to the brilliance and balance that enchants viewers today. As our imaginary skating rink of history begins to fade into the restful dim, the sheets of ice lay pristine, promising further feats and tales yet to be danced. A gentle promise rests softly in this wintry glow, and as you dream in the tranquil embrace of history and humor, perhaps the lingering traces of skaters' blades will see us gently forward as our melody of time unwinds into slumberland. The curtain rises, or perhaps it merely shivers a touch, on the elegant ice rinks of the roaring 1920s. Imagine, if you will, a time when radios crackled with new voices, and newsprint burst with stories of daring dances on blades, all served with a side of societal evolution. Oh yes, figure skating in those days was quite the tapestry of talent and taffeta, though one mustn't get too close with a cup of cocoa unless you're intent on experiencing something akin to a Jackson Pollock painting, both delightful and perplexing. Our heroine of this calm narrative is none other than Sonja Henie, a Norwegian sprite who first graced the public ice stage as a mere child. Imagine a cherubic face, rosy from the cold, creating marvels as her blade-clad feet whispered secrets to her that the ice could not keep. The spectators would lean in closer, not that they had a choice given the blustering winds that sometimes commandeered these open-air events. Their avid anticipation was an act of faith, as was hoping their hats wouldn't spontaneously decide to join Sonja in her skates. During these nascent Olympics, Heaney was not yet the Goliath she would soon become in the women's figure skating world. Picture her, if you will, in a charming outfit that teetered between function and frilly rebellion, an attire dramatic enough that would later make Lady Gaga nod with deep appreciation. But it wasn't just Heaney's attire that caused stirs. No, it was also her dancing, a disco ball of movement in a world still comparing notes on the old tinny phonographs of yore. But beyond the exquisite performances stood a larger story, delicately swaying across the ice like a competent, though slightly anxious, ballerina on opening night. Women in figure skating faced hurdles that weren't always purely physical. It was a time when the endurance required wasn't just about pirouetting gracefully, but also persisting tenaciously against the breeze of skepticism about women athletes. It was said, though perhaps only whispered by those not wanting to startle the glide, that women on the ice could very well have led to bouts of fainting in the more delicate members of the audience. As we linger in the scene, the judges huddle in their grandstands, shivering slightly under the pressing insistence of the elements, wrapped perhaps in more layers than a well-prepared lasagna. Their expressions remain inscrutable, a tapestry of patience versus polar vortex, as they nod within the confines of voluminous scarves. Compiling scores in these conditions was truly artistry itself. Was it an 8 or a gust of wind nudging the pen slightly off course? One could never be quite sure. Throughout all this, the eyes of the world held their breaths, unbeknownst to the fact a firm grip could lift the whole activity right off its precarious shoes. Somehow, amidst the swirling political snowflakes and societal expectations, women's figure skating kept its toe pick deftly on the ice, refusing to be unceremoniously seated in the stands or melted away by history's less than attentive sun. What truly set Sonia Heaney apart from her contemporaries, and indeed from the harrowing winds, was not merely her talent, but a certain defiance. She reminded us what skating truly embodied: the graceful glide over challenges, the poised spin around indecision, and the perfect balance amidst tremendous speed that can make one's ruffled feathers, or skirts, twirl with occasional exasperation and elegance. Heaney believed in figure skating as more than a sport. She saw it as a theatre on ice, one where the narrative was as compelling as the choreography, and where the barriers were meant to be carved through with equal parts skill and charm. Could this be the plucky maneuvering that ensured the discipline's survival against the ever-charming juggernaut that was the rest of winter sports? For here was a sport that offered not just the thrill of competition, but an allegorical balance, much like a perfectly performed axel, of grace against gravity. And so, with heavy lids and a heart buoyed by imagination, we inch forward, gliding gently into the next chapter of history, where each page turns a lacy pirouette on the ice of our collective memory, leaving a faint yet indelible mark. In the wintry dreamscape of 1924, nestled somewhere between the sea of history and a particularly unruly snowdrift, we find ourselves at the first official Winter Olympics, held in Chamonix, France. Now, it's worth noting that these games were so chilly, even the narratives came with a sweater. And aptly enough, figure skating was a feature, its elegant pirouettes capturing the delicate swirl of frost on the ground. Despite the grace and poise we associate with the sport today, back then it had all the consistency of a melting snowman. Our spotlight this evening drifts over an enterprising young woman named Herma Sabo of Austria. Picture a snowy Olympian and a gentle glint in her eye that says, "Watch me revolutionize this sport while also looking fabulous." Herma was a force to be reckoned with, sweeping elegantly across the ice as if she were the very breath of winter itself. Her magic lay in her ability to transform jaw-dropping athletic feats into what appeared to be a divine flirtation with the forces of gravity, a relationship that the ice, the wind, and audiences everywhere found irresistibly captivating. Yet, the burgeoning drama in these early winter games was not merely about the rival figure skaters who swirled like snowflakes brushing against the competitive horizon. It involved the very fabric of female participation itself. Consider, if you will, the robust discussions in well-dressed rooms where men, armed with time-appropriate pomposity and perhaps too much brandy, debated the impact of figure skating on women's constitutions. Never mind the fact that these remarkable women had been gliding across frozen ponds since they were knee-high to an ice sculpture. Indeed, concerns abounded about women's participation being unladylike or too strenuous, as if liberty and the ability to elegantly whisk around on two blades were somehow mutually exclusive. Stories floated through the alpine air, alleging that such dashing athleticism might lead to bulging muscles. Fear not, dear listener. Herma and her cohort skated onward, muscles surely intact and composure unyielding, proving critics to be less well-grounded than an Olympic triple axel. But the ice did have its moments of rebelliousness. It certainly did not help matters when, during one particularly exhilarating spin, Herma gracefully collided with an audacious pigeon that had taken an ill-advised hanging-out position just above head height in the rink. In a theatrical puff of feathers, the scene transformed from a graceful ice dance into something more akin to comedic ice ballet. The crowd's gasp was only outdone by the well-executed curtsy that Herma gave after disentangling herself, a moment worthy of any applause and further evidence that the sport, much like Herma, was here to stay. The persistence of these pioneering athletes was as unyielding as the ice fields around them. Their performances carved swirls of descent into the culture, pushing through societal frosts and toward a warmer reception. It was the age of the Roaring Twenties, after all, a wild waltz where everyone was too busy having a good time to notice tradition slipping on a literal banana peel. So as these trailblazing skaters painted the ice with their tenacity and flair, the world began to thaw to the idea that maybe, just maybe, women figure skaters could pirouette into the annals of athletic history just as boldly as their male counterparts. And as you watch the snow gently settle on your dreams, remember that change, like every resilient flake, begins with the smallest of moments, often sweeping across a rink in a show-stopping costume, defying both gravity and expectation. Let this thought float gently like an elegant snowflake, or a leisurely skate on a quiet ice pond as we glide towards yet another scene of this winter's tale. Nestled in the frosted tapestry of the 1928 Winter Olympics, held in the delightful chill of St. Moritz, was a little-known clamor over women and their elegant ice-bound pirouettes. You see, while men comfortably thrummed the ice with their blades, turning it into a ripple of cutlets and crossovers, the presence of women in this hallowed arena almost melted away like an ice cube under the mild Swiss sun. Picture this: glamorous dresses that flirted with the notion of practicality and skates that seemed more intent on waltzing rather than racing. This was an era when the myriad flourishes of lace and feathers threatened to snag more than just the judges' attention. Yes, it seems the biggest hurdles weren't the jumps on the rink, but rather the perception of femininity itself sliding gracefully onto center stage. The women, whose movements wove a kind of ballet onto the ice, raised eyebrows and, without a doubt, some old-fashioned notions. A group of gentlemen dignitaries, clearly unaccustomed to anything more cellular than a bowler hat, posited that such frivolity could hardly be considered a sport. After all, should sport not constitute brute strength, colored with a dash of palpable, masculine perspiration? Yet regardless of these opinionated naysayers' best efforts, the female skaters persisted as gracefully as ever, their blades sketching resolute doodles against the icy canvas. Leading the charge was an exquisite whirlwind named Sonja Henie of Norway. At just 15, an age when troublesome horcruxes commonly include algebra and curfews, Henie was a force of nature on a blade's edge. She twirled through skepticism with the audacity of a salmon leaping up a cascade, her every flourish bolstered by the weight of history. The judges. They too played a significant role in this finely balanced dance between tradition and the tantalizing new. Perhaps attending the games equipped with fur coats, more enthusiastic than broad-minded, they were nonetheless gradually, and rather unwittingly, beguiled. Much like a cat confronting a particularly fascinating beam of light, their initial sternness gave way to a peculiar tilt of admiration. Now, imagine the scene. Sonia Haney's slender form tracing flourishes atop what must have seemed to her a globe of crystal. Every triple toe loop a declaration of icy independence. Beyond mere spectacle and beneath the shimmering veils was a faint promise. Her graceful competence contradicted those antiquated fears of femininity shattering delicate ice. Thus, Haney notched a nail in the coffin of doubt about women's place within the winter spectacle. The audience, assembled like a kaleidoscope of furs, hats and scarves, though not without some grumbling amongst its folds, yielded to fascination. Surely, here was a sport, even if it refused to bark and bellow upon command. It whispered elegance into the broad folds of Olympic history. Thus, the contest morphed from mere ice dancing to a pinnacle of sporting narrative, a testament to the idea that women, with their gliding complexity, were not just figures on frozen ponds. They were champions sculpting an icy legacy, one toe-heel combination at a time. Amidst all of this, the sun-dappled peaks of St. Moritz stood like silent spectators, patient amidst the swaying tides of change. Haney and others like her quietly sketched victory with blades as their pen and ice as their parchment. The whispers of the past met the expectancy of the future on this theatre of frost, fashioning bedrock for those who would ply their craft in the colder arms of the seasons to come. As the stars began to pepper the nightly canvas, a sense of calm nodded across the encampment. Unwittingly, the Winter Olympics had become a tapestry where tenacity and grace blended into a warming promise, a promise that would stretch long and far beyond the dreaming horizon. And so, the gentle rhythm of history continued to cascade, as serene and persistent as a lullaby unfolding across the snowy folds of time. As we glide into the tapestry of the 1924 Winter Olympics, like a gentle skater stepping onto a beautifully frozen lake, we find ourselves wrapped in a peculiar aura. The idyllic charm of Chamonix, France, has lured spectators from far and wide, with promises of dashing skaters carving poetry into ice. Our focus, dear listener, is on the luminous world of women's figure skating, a pool of grace and sequins that nearly, and quite comically, slipped off the roster of what we affectionately call the Games. Casting an eye over the early history of this sport, one can't help but chuckle at the delightful absurdity of it all. Imagine, if you will, that figure skating was once considered too frivolous for the somber rigors of athletic competition. The planners of the first Winter Games were puzzled over how to judge something so delicate in skill and so whimsically adorned. There were, naturally, protests about how one could possibly score a twirl, a full-blown philosopher's dilemma on blades. We pause here for a moment to envision the arbiters of these games, tucked in their heavy woolen coats, clutching cups of hot cocoa. Perhaps they pondered, should artistry on ice fit the medal criteria of sportsmanship or fanciful pageantry? It's the kind of existential question that might keep a Victorian gentleman awake at night, or perhaps drift him into gentle slumber. In that frosty French January of 1924, skating got its chance to showcase its elegance. The judges, presumably well-rested and ready for a dalliance with the extraordinary. Sonia Haney, Norway's budding starlet at the tender age of 11, tiptoed onto the rink like a swan in a fairy tale. Though she didn't win the gold that time, her playful spins and audaciously looped glides laid cornerstones for skating's future. How wondrous to think that little Sonia, with her mischievous twirls, was penning the prologue to a revolution in this intriguing sport. Meanwhile, the elders of skating, such as Herma Sabo, with her stately presence, brought about an entirely different narrative, one where the boundaries between silent films and competitive sport pleasantly blurred. Her performances were less about rigid execution of moves and more about storytelling upon the ice. With an elegance unrivaled, she swept across the ice, summoning visions of ancient myths and wide-smiling muses. But ponder this. What if the judges, captivated as they were, had been harsher? If they'd treated figure skating as merely an exhibition at best? The art of quadruple axels might have been confined to small-town carnivals, and winter games would feature more luges and fewer pirouettes. So you see, the survival of women's figure skating in the Olympic history books wasn't quite an epic battle of wills on snow-capped peaks or flashes of steel in Nordic skies. Rather, it was a gentle persuasion, a coquettish glance from a skater mid-flight, the peaceful sound of skates slicing into ice like butter, and the way an audience used to stoic exercises in snowy sterility succumb to the allure of sequins under twinkling floodlights. As we bid farewell to the elegant pursuits of these early skaters, we feel the comforting nocturne of history wrapping us in its cozy embrace. The delicate dance of figure skating has only just begun brushing its vivid strokes upon the wintry canvas of the Olympic Games, a ballet expressed with crystalline precision, sure to continue evolving and enchanting. Now, as we drift softly onward, perhaps feeling our eyelids grow as heavy as that first snowfall, let our dreams twirl and glide much like those early Olympians. And so, may we all find ourselves skating smoothly into the next chapter of our restful story. In the frosty year of 1928, the world eagerly awaited the arrival of the Winter Olympic Games in St. Moritz, an exquisite Swiss village nestled in the snowy embrace of the Alps. The mountains provided the perfect backdrop for an event intended to celebrate athletic prowess and harmonious international relationships. Yet, unbeknownst to most, the women's figure skating competition was teetering on the edge of becoming a curiously endangered sport. Our history unfolds with a polished blade's tension sweeping across the ice, carrying with it the hopes and dreams of figure skaters ready to swirl into the annals of Olympic history. Picture this: a pristine, frozen lake shimmering under the gentle kiss of a late January sun. The pristine quiet interrupted only by the delicate scratches of skate blades and the occasional quack of a puzzled spectator duck. The women's figure skating competition was still in fragile infancy, a serene ballet on ice, desperately trying to twirl itself into prominence like a well-practiced pirouette. The scene previously painted by Norman Rockwell had its slightly absurd moments. For instance, the outfits, most certainly designed by someone with a hearty appreciation for function over form. Woolen skirts that would better outfit a schoolroom than an ice rink fluttered clunkily as skaters attempted their elegant spins and jumps. If the textile industry's goal was to inspire a hybrid between an Arctic explorer and a Sunday churchgoer, they'd succeeded with flying colors. But alas, function rarely took. Function, home the gold medal, and neither did it engender the audience adulation necessary to secure figure skating's future. The competition kicked off with a performance best described as adventurous choreography meets divine intervention. The ice was unpredictably unpredictable, a step away from developing a personality of its own. Graceless falls were not unmet with warmth, but with polite Swiss applause, a gesture of decorum alongside trays of hot cocoa, so robust it might as well have been served with a spoon. Enter the intrepid Sonja Henie, a Norwegian teenager of diminutive stature and boundless ambition. Sonja was not your ordinary skater. She was a firework dressed in wool, a whirling dervish with a smile that thawed even the most frigid alpine air. At the tender age of 15, she was determined to set the ice on fire, metaphorically, lest molten lakes become part of the competition in future games. Henie spun across the rink with a startling grace that drew gasps from the audience, both delight and disbelief mingling in the crisp air. Her figure eights were figures of eight, and her landings more akin to whispers upon the ice than the clumsy crashes of her peers. With each elegant leap, she defied physics just enough to keep things interesting, but not so much as to arouse suspicions of witchcraft. Her secret? Besides the rigorous training and innate talent, Henie injected a radical combination of artistry and athleticism into her routines, luring onlookers into a trance of pirouettes and axels. Sonja introduced the sport not only as a competition but as a performance art, calling to the stage the future of figure skating with each gliding step. The audience watched, mesmerized, as Henie's routine culminated in a flurry of spins. Faster and faster she twirled, until finally, with a joyful leap, she landed in a triumphant pose. The applause was thunderous, cacophonous perhaps, echoing through the sleepy Alps with an enthusiasm from which even the glaciers seemed to awaken. It was an icy tale of transformative potential where art emerged from under the snow. And in that moment, the tired sport of figure skating found its champion. It dared to imagine a future where elegance could exist without being swaddled in practicality. Women's figure skating had taken a fragile step away from obscurity, propelled by a Norwegian teen's athletic artistry. As she stepped away from the ice, Sonja Henie left more than delicate tracks across the crystal surface. She left a promise of what the sport could become, a promise that the Winter Games, much like a dreamy bedtime tale, could end on a note of beauty as lofty and everlasting as majestic alpine peaks. And so, as the sun set behind those towering mountains, casting purples and blues across the snow, the pages of history gently turned, whispering gossamer secrets of what awaited in another dusk-lit chapter. As the gentle chill whispered across the icy landscape, we drift into the oddly peculiar world of figure skating. This world is one where grace defies gravity and sequins throttle physics, all while the participants twirl with faces as serene as a dozing cat. We find ourselves gliding through the early days of the Winter Olympic Games, when women's figure skating seemed caught in an existential spin, akin to a confused ice Charleston, wondering what it was doing in front of a crowd. Picture it now. The year is 1908, and the Summer Games in London have boldly crashed the party by randomly plonking figure skating onto its schedule. A bold move indeed, considering it wasn't even winter. It was as if they'd decided that a summer festival needed an unexpected ice cream van in the Sahara. Yet, against all odds, it worked with surprising coolness. Among the trailblazers was a lady by the name of Florence Madeline Madge Sayers. Madge, you see, was not just any skater. She was the founding mother of female participation in this rigorous sport that all but screamed, "Don't wear skirts here, dear." At a time when women were delicately nudged out of men's sporting events with the surreptitiousness of a librarian shushing a noisy teen, Madge saw the ice rink as her glittering cakewalk. Confronted with the fact that women's intrusion into such icy escapades was rather unprecedented, the skating authorities of the time adopted the only logical approach. They shrugged and said, "Well, all right then." Thus, in a move that gave future generations of female skaters a platform covered in sparkles and spins, Madge glided across boundaries, literally and figuratively. In the backdrop of all this ice-capade drama, 1924 rolled around with the first official Winter Olympic Games in Chamonix. It was here that women's skating found itself unexpectedly in the spotlight, armed with the same kind of panache and intrigue that accompanies watching someone juggling while riding a unicycle through a crowded street, only more elegant and less chaotic. Madge's pioneering influence was seen in the fearless women who now took to the rink. Notable was Herma Sabo, an Austrian skater who swung the pendulum for women in this frosty domain by taking the gold. Her performance was so dazzling that it reportedly sent chills down the spines of even the iciest of judges, or perhaps that was just a draft from the high-altitude wind. Still, women's figure skating faced more trials than a pair of skates doing a pirouette gone awry. For the next several decades, the sport would teeter on the brink of oblivion, saved more than once by the sheer whimsy and delight it induced in the spectators who flocked to see each slippery spectacle. Women, undeterred, tossed their hats on the ice, figuratively of course, since hats would not only throw off the aerodynamics, but also obscure the incredible sequined artistry of their outfits. Indeed, the early years of women's figure skating were a testament to resilience and the pure spirit of gliding forward, much like trying to gracefully exit a slippery dance floor after realizing you've mislaid your shoes. And as we leave our skaters mid-lutz, mid-twirl, with perhaps a parting wink of one who knows she's left history trailing in the subtle snowflakes of her wake, we prepare to journey onward. We tuck this chapter away with the care of an Olympic committee, attempting to ensure the next event doesn't plummet through thin ice. Drift gently now as we explore further into the tale. drawing closer to the core of where icy dreams and reality meet on the rinks of yore. As slumber whispers in the background and the gentle hum of skating blades echoes softly in our minds, we glide gracefully into yet another chapter of our historical slumber party. Picture, if you will, the frosty sparkle of the 1924 Winter Olympics in Chamonix, a place where women's figure skating teetered on the edge of oblivion, much like a skater on the brink of an elegant, but entirely accidental, swan dive. The early Winter Games were a rather intriguing affair. While snow flurries played in the air like mischievous ghosts, the organizers were busily scurrying around, eyes wide with logistical conundrums. You see, figure skating in those days was as much about balance as it was about gender balance. Women on the ice. Oh, the scandal, the inconsistency, and dare I say, the frozen dilemma. Competitions were held with delightful enthusiasm, despite the chilly reception from those who believed winter sports were unsuited for the supposedly delicate constitution of women. How naive they were. These skating dynamos were about to shake up more than just snow on their skirts, slashing through the icy prejudice with blades sharper than the wits of their naysayers. They whirled and twirled, turning skepticism into applause. Enter Herma Sabo, a fascinating character from Vienna, spinning myths of incapability into legends of grace. Descending onto the rink like a snowflake with an agenda, Herma demonstrated with each flourish that elegance and power are not mutually exclusive. With her historic win, Szabo heralded not only a gold medal, but also a metaphorical snowstorm of change. In another curious footnote, the early judges, with their fur-lined collars and stern brows, implemented a scoring system that might as well have been devised by a huddle of squirrels on a particularly indecisive day. Style, speed, and an unquantifiable category called unmistakable flair left room for endless subjectivity. It wasn't just nap-inducing math, it was an impromptu exercise in interpretive sleep. Still, the uncertainties surrounding figure skating barely caused a pause in its spirited execution, thanks to innovative thinkers like Alice Coachman, who famously skipped stones off frozen ponds to perfect her leap. Not entirely relevant here, but delightfully inspiring nonetheless. In these formative years, amid whispers of whether women's futures on ice were as thin as the blades, beneath their feet, competitors leaned into every leap, every spin, with an optimistic beauty that ensured the art itself would not dwindle. Oh, they practiced empathy and rebellion in equal strokes, each revolution defying any thought of exclusion. Backstage, forests of wooden skis leaned against pale walls, and there, surrounded by the magic of snow as soft as dreams, sportsmanship blossomed like a hopeful snowdrop in early thaw. Sturdier than snowmen and just as charming, these women endured hours on the rink, igniting a trail that would endure far beyond those tentative early games. Thus, the 1924 Olympics were nothing if not a tableau of icy defiance and melting conventions. Women skaters carved their fine art across the fabric of history, a tapestry where each intricate stitch told a story of perseverance against the odds, with the passion of a phoenix and the finesse of a seasoned dramatist. As the hum of history's ice resurfacing machine fades into the breezy night, let us transition smoothly into our next adventure, gently propelled by icy grace and dreams of evenly zambonied rinks ahead. We float onward, comforted by the notion that even in the face of frosty skepticism, a warm human spirit, and perhaps a good pair of skates, can glide us toward new horizons, no longer at the mercy of oblivion or uncertainty. As the crisp dawn of the 1924 Winter Olympics began to glow like a delicate watercolor painting, somewhere in the deep recesses of Chamonix, a figure skater was trying to wrestle her toe picks out of an ice patch that seemed to have developed an unnatural fascination with her right skate. A love affair gone icy, she might have muttered under her breath, were it not for the biting cold persuading her words back down her throat. At this time, Olympic figure skating was somewhat akin to a fascinating, albeit underdeveloped, book. It was a genre not yet explored, waiting for a brave soul with a flourish as graceful as it was daring. Ladies. Figure skating had just recently debuted in the Summer Games of 1908, but there it teetered on the brink of anonymity. The Winter Olympics, offering a more suitable, icy stage, might be as divisive as serving hot cocoa to penguins, but the stakes seemed worth it. These early games were a sleepy affair, a cozy gathering of winter sports enthusiasts who occasionally glanced at their watches, half expecting them to tell them it was time for tea rather than competition. The ladies' figure skating contingent wasn't vast, yet what it lacked in numbers, it made up for in a rich tapestry of interesting anecdotes. Madge Sayers, the pioneering muse of the Summer Games, hadn't expected to find herself evoked as a past master just over a decade later. Her legacy was a beacon for young women in skirts shorter than a Shakespearean sonnet, but filled with twice the grace and thrice the flounce. Perhaps here, on a blanket of frost that could only be described as nature's fanciest dance floor, they might begin to unearth greater glories. At the helm of such youthful exuberance was Herma Sabo, a skater from Austria whose name pirouetted around conversations like a passé not yet passé. Herma didn't merely skate, she danced with the ice. The blades of her skates whispered sweet nothings to the frozen surface, which replied with resounding echoes of applause disguised as polite, pleasing scrapes. Her competitors encompassed a flotilla of unique talents. There were skaters with serious expressions that could transform a snowfall into self-doubt, and others whose smiles were so warm, it was a wonder they didn't melt their own pathways across the rink. Yet, as they twirled and leaped, spectators soon realized these women possessed the same essence of determination as any athlete. They carved arcs, not just into the ice, but into history itself. Then there was the attire, which was an ever-engaging conversation in itself. Skating costumes during this time, while not the Technicolor marvels of today, were rather more subdued, sometimes appearing more like the daily dress of capable governesses off to fetch bread and nearly trip over corgis. Nevertheless, each outfit was a tapestry woven with the skater's personality and would seem to a modern eye a bit like discovering your grandmother's treasured quilts had suddenly taken to practicing spins. Whispers swirled in the cold air as competitions progressed, hinting that if these games did not nurture women's figure skating, it might falter. There were other sports, they said, with sleds gliding at breakneck speeds, ski jumps that defied natural order, and hockey sticks swinging with reckless abandon. Yet for every doubt cast, there came a bright-eyed spectator enchanted, dreaming perhaps of a future where figure skating could become the prima ballerina of winter sports. As Herma Sabo took to the ice, the collective breaths of onlookers synchronized into a steady calm. Her routine was a flow of artistry that seemed to stretch time itself, turning minutes into soft flutters. But more than simply meddling, the alchemy of her performance sparked new dreams in the hearts of many. As the light of that first Winter Olympiad began to dim, women's figure skating had indeed survived its nascent appearance. Those etched patterns in the ice were a tapestry to be woven further, knitted gently into the history books with every future flourish and leap. As the shadows lengthened and the skaters took their final bows, there remained a sense of something magical, like the soft rustle of a bedtime tale being told to drowsy children. This was not merely a reflection of the triumphs and tribulations of early figure skating, but the quiet promise that, as the sports world slumbered on that crisp alpine night, new chapters awaited to be unfurled. And so, as the night gently wrapped itself around future dreams, we too find ourselves standing at the threshold of another story, one eager to unfold as softly as a snowflake upon the dawn, nestled in the Nordic chill of 1936, where every snowflake seemed to fall in perfectly choreographed pirouettes. The world gathered in Garmisch-Partenkirchen to witness the Winter Olympics. It was an era that took itself very seriously, much like a penguin in a tuxedo. Yet amongst all the sports that required absurd bravery, like the ski jump, where you launched yourself off a slope and hoped the laws of physics were on your side, it was the seemingly graceful discipline of figure skating that held everyone's breath. Enveloped in the delicate lace of the era, the women's Olympic figure skating event unfolded with a certain air of high drama laced with various undertones of comedy, much like when you realize your cat's interest in art is just accidental paw prints on wet canvas. This was an enchanted spectacle, a ballet on ice that hovered precariously between art and athletics, delightfully underpinned by a tapestry of historical, seeded quirks. Contenders came from all corners of the globe, each carrying their own national hopes and inevitably an assortment of woolen undergarments, essential combat gear for navigating the icy arenas of the early games. They arrived with suitcases almost as heavy as their competitive spirits. The good people of Garmisch, who were coaxing heat out of wooden stoves and trying to understand this new invention called television, could only marvel at the sight of so many determined ladies gliding rapidly and artistically toward glory. Hailing from Great Britain, the elegant Megan Taylor, a skater whose charm was only rivaled by her razor-sharp blades, danced upon the ice as if whispering secrets to the snow itself. Her spins were dizzying, not just to her audience, but also occasionally to Megan, as she admitted to steering herself inadvertently into what could only be described as an accidental, three-footed landing with a touch of comedy. Then there was Cecilia College, also from the UK, a youthful prodigy who shockingly invented a maneuver known today as the camel spin. At just 11 years old, Cecilia turned what was likely an awkward stumble into a revolutionary moment. People were left enchanted and slightly confused as they debated whether camel alluded to an Arabian remains of burden or to her ability to store extraordinary vitality within herself for the entire routine. Scandinavia, not to be outdone in this cold water ballet, presented their own ice queen, Sonja Henie. Haney entered the rink under more scrutiny than a Virginia Woolf manuscript in a penguin colony, yet all eyes softened to wonderment as she transformed the ice into her royal courtyard. A three-time Olympic champion. By this point, Haney twinkled through her routines, owning the ice as if it owed her rent money. Her secret weapon was a pretzel-like flexibility, which allowed her to indulge in spins reminiscent of a top trying to impress the floor. The audiences endured the orchard-chilling hours wrapped in coats and unparalleled enthusiasm, harmoniously gasping and owing over everything from Heaney's glimmering sequins to Taylor's charming misadventures. The cameras, each as large as a small automobile and tended by cameramen wrapped in scarves like experimental mummies, captured every suspended moment of this wintry spectacle. Although controversies emerged as they tend to at the intersection of art and sport, was a particular spin truly a signature move? Were those sequins smuggled? No dispute could extinguish the palpable magic that hung in the frosty air. If anything, these debates only added to the dramatic flair of this theatrical ice pageant. The skaters, absorbed by the illusion of flight above ice, appeared to weave tales as fragile and beautiful as frost flowers blooming upon a window pane. As each routine ended, each bow taken, the knights drew on, inviting in the quiet applause of falling snow. It was this ethereal confluence of history, humor, and heart that ensured women's figure skating would not only survive, but thrive through future sports spectacles. Propelled by a kind blend of humor, talent, and the ice beneath their feet, these figures of resilience left a pattern of silvery dreams etched into the history of the Winter Games. Unfazed by past controversies and future challenges yet to come, these early skaters' whimsical grace was not lost on history's pages, setting the stage for a story that would unfurl with all the grace and humor they had spun across the ice. As the night gently pulls us deeper into its embrace, we drift quietly with the tune of another tale waiting in the twilight, in the hushed whispers of 1932, while the world adjusted its spectacles to peer through the fogs of an economic depression. The grandeur of the Winter Olympics gently unfurled its frosty carpets in Lake Placid, New York. A retreating frost met the optimistic heat of global camaraderie, still wearing its training wheels when it came to women's sports, notably figure skating. The icy elegance of the sport teetered on the cusp of something both remarkable and, quite literally, slippery. Figure skating, despite its artistic predispositions, was embroiled in a bit of a logistical and gender-drenched conundrum during these early Winter Games. The men, of course, had been gallantly gliding and jumping with varying degrees of success since the introduction of figure skating in the Summer Olympics of 1908. That's right, figure skating was the one sport that brought winter chill to the otherwise sun-soaked mists of London. A curious anomaly indeed, but for the women, equal footing on the international ice was as elusive as a triple axel in the midst of a blizzard. The twist in Lake Placid's tale revolves around some fascinating figures, skating under constraints tighter than the strings on their costumes. It posed a time when the very suggestion of women skaters, solo or in pairs, on Olympic ice had more resistance than a Zamboni running low on fuel. Enter Charlotte Oelschlegel, a dazzling specimen from Germany who, by the mere flick of her skate, had previously enchanted audiences and judges alike with her beguiling spiral and energetic salcho. Her elegant defiance of gravity was not just a tribute to her personal agility, but also a pantomime of protest against prevailing norms hedging women into the periphery. In Lake Placid, it was Oelschlegel's spirit of advocacy that danced, inspiring a template for the female skaters who could finally compete on more equal terms. Outfitted with courage, perhaps more sharply honed than their skates, these women were poised to prove that they could spin tales of icebound charm just as enchantingly as their male counterparts. Yet, the obstacles were as numerous as the clinks of a figure skate's toe pick. The quirky scorecards, handed down from officials who seemed to believe that a volley of numbers could truly capture grace, often served an alphabet soup of injustice. The fact that some evaluators had the artistic discernment of a stuck snowplow did not help the cause, but there lay the comedy in the gracious, if sometimes absurd, acceptance of these fledgling international rules. Amidst this frosty battleground, Sonja Henie emerged, a Norwegian whirlwind with dazzling routines that would leave opponents spinning in befuddlement rather than brilliance. Her artistry on ice and her insatiable competitive spirit not only romanced audiences, but cleverly rewrote the history books, forging a path for women figure skaters from novelty acts to central attractions. Henie, in her twirl-laden pursuits, left more than a trail of glitter behind her. She carved avenues for inquiry. Why should women not be celebrated for their daring athletics? Why should their feats on the frost not be as lauded as those inked by male daredevils draped in argyle sweaters and three-piece suits, attire once humorously donned even while performing an impeccable lutz? As you muse over these icy soirees from the comfort of your cozy blanket, let the gentle sway of progress inch its way into your dreams. For the world embraced a new era in women's figure skating, with every graceful leap marking a page turned against chilly opposition, much like a late-night flick of a beloved bedtime story. And so, as you nestle back upon your pillow and let the soft glow of history's lamp flicker warm shadows across your eyelids, imagine what tales the next spotlight on ice might reveal. A stage broom cleaned for the resilient, silent strength only hinted at, but brewing ever deeper in the frosted annals of the Winter Games. Gather your blankets tighter around your shoulders and let your imagination glide across the ice of time, tickled by the gentle snowflakes of history's whimsical moments. We arrive now at the winter of 1924, at the inaugural Winter Olympics, nestled in the frostbitten arms of Chamonix, France. Picture this frosty landscape, where the warm breath of determination hovered visibly above the snow-covered ground, and a quieter revolution unfolded beneath the intricate dance of women's ice skates. Imagine the scene underlining this icy affair. It was a time when women's figure skating was still finding the snug fit of its own polished slipper, amidst a world that seemed perpetually surprised by the notion of women taking to public competitions. Oh, what a notion! Yet the charm of this sport lay not just in its athletic demand, but in the ethereal beauty it demanded of its competitors, an embrace of both grace and power, a partnership that still seemed suspect to the antiquated norms of the early 20th century. A notable figure spinning amid the cold winds of 1924 was Herma Sabo, an Austrian skater whose presence on the ice was as commanding as a sovereign queen. Her performances were not just a spectacle, but a statement, as shimmering as the sequins on her costume that proclaimed, "Yes, we too can glide." With a heart full of ambition and Austrian schnitzel, she pirouetted into history. Back then, not too far off in a distance clouded by skeptical eyebrows, a whispering audience bore witness not with smartphones and flashbulbs, but with binoculars, mittens tightly clutching their hot beverages as if hoping their skepticism could melt away with the steam. Was it perhaps under these very mittens that doubts were stealthily hidden, watching as women executed triple spins and jumps, which seemed almost magical, worthy of being told in bedtime stories? Hermar's elegant performances were an argument against absurdity, that women in embellished costumes spinning around on sharp blades could indeed be Olympic athletes. And all the while, she maintained amusing thoughts about how underwhelmed her mother might be if she were to witness her daughter merely gliding majestically, instead of perhaps curing an illness or inventing something useful like, say, a toaster. Sippy strudel. The perseverance of figure skating women reflected subtle changes untying the lace of conventional expectations. Slowly, cautiously, yet undoubtedly. Around their secure blades of steel revolved not only their ankles, but the very axis of gender norms. It was as if each daring double axel was whispering to the onlookers, "See, we don't just waltz with parlor grace, we dance with the audacity of heroes." Herma, and the women like her, spun not only on ice, but spun the wheel of progress. Progress, however, often resembles a particularly complex skating routine. There are spins, turns, and sometimes falls. With humor in their hearts and irony carved into their ice skates, they continued to twirl into history. At that tender age of the Winter Games, wherein sunlight teased the snow-crusted Alps, each pirouette and leap swayed with determination to be remembered as Stella Polaris, dabbing its glow against a tapestry woven by frost. Heroes they were, veiled perhaps in sequined gowns rather than cloaks of armor, but warriors no less. Soon, however, as our story swirls to its whispering conclusion, let us twirl our thoughts around the delicate threads of progress. Picture the curling snow into which women's figure skating etched its indelible mark, forever changed by the daring of those early skaters who danced not just for medals, but for possibilities. Imagine their laughter, lightly sprinkled over the ice, as though foreseeing the grandeur their pursuit would someday hold. And now, dear listener, as we gently coast to the edge of this chapter, let your dreams skate seamlessly onward, leaving gentle trails in the frosty landscape of history. In that sleepy interval between awake and slumber, giggle at the escapades of our heroines, the laughter of history softly coaxing you further into dreams. Stay tuned, for there lies more in the tales of these daring pioneers. In the soft whisper of history's peculiar embrace, we find ourselves at a delicate junction of the past and ice, a frosty stage set at the bosom of the early Winter Olympic Games. Picture this. The air induces a rosy blush on one's cheeks, and the very ground beneath is an expanse of glittering ice, just waiting for the grace and gallop of skates. It is here, amidst the gentle pirouettes and not-so-gentle landings, where the saga of women's figure skating knits its charming tale. Our setting is the competing arenas of the 1920s and 1930s, a time when debates weren't sparked by who buried a quadruple axel, but rather if a woman hopping about on blades was entirely sensible. You see, it wasn't long before this era that riding a bicycle was considered dangerously liberating for the fairer gender. Imagine the outcry when these women decided that the best place for a graceful jump was on ice. If Victorian minds had dealt with sweating brows over the issue of women bicycling through the countryside, you can only imagine the collective swoon when the first woman executed a Lutz. In this peculiar confluence of propriety and athletics, there walks out a paragon of icy finesse, Sonja Henie, a skater whose name might be whispered with reverence, or perhaps mild jealousy, by aspiring swans all over. Sonja didn't just skate, she charmed, dazzled, and, according to gossip circulating amidst the early Olympic judges, probably confused them with her boundless energy. The story goes that at just 11 years of age, Sonja made her Olympic debut. 11. an age when most of us were likely still trying to perfect the noble art of tying shoelaces, Sonia was gliding into history with a poise that was more swan than cygnet. But before Sonia's triple spin rise to household name status, the Olympic Figure Skating Committee itself slipped and wobbled over slightly more serious skirmishes, like deciding if an event that encouraged women to raise limbs skyward in embellished attire was like summoning societal Armageddon. Each leap of these skaters to some critics seemed like an affront to the very fabrics of their skirts, literal and metaphorical. In competition, our beloved Sonia wouldn't just skate to win. She'd skate to stir a gentle tempest in societal teacups, sporting shorter skirts that defied the recommended few extra inches of fabric modesty would suggest. And as she floated gracefully through triple loops, so too did she through the minds of the audience, which witnessed firsthand a tug-of-war between the notions of grace and gravity, and not only the physical sort. But let's not forget our ineffably dynamic arena, more volatile than an unstable Lutzland, the 1920s Olympic judging process. Judges sat with stern faces and pencil-sharpened anticipation, occasionally surprised to find marks for artistry mattered as much as technicality. These were, let's remember, early days when one would often wonder if the judges cared more about the telegraph wires working for their commentaries rather than the skaters' landings. Yet, as history melted and refroze itself with each passing Olympiad, women's figure skating solidified its charm, enticing more women participants who dared to chase the frosty dreams Sonia had so dazzlingly displayed. Olympic history dances with the ethereal imprints of thousands of toe picks, each marking a step towards gender equality, albeit on an unsteady rink. As these beautiful performances grew more frequent, the ice rinks filled not just with the sound of blades cutting through cold silence, but with the harmonious applause of an audience enchanted by drama and elegance. The once contentious swirls and leaps of women's figure skating flowed into a symphony of winter games, becoming an indispensable part of the frozen Olympics landscape. And so, as we glide onward through our tale, let's pause momentarily on this frosted edge, savoring the fleeting echo of Sonia's ambitious spins and the gently warming acceptance of women's athletics in the all-so-snowy Olympic horizon. As the fairy dust of history settles, our next chapter beckons, shimmering with yet more tales of graceful revolution and the unrivaled poetry of movement above the ice. There was a time, dear listener, when the delicate twirls and graceful glides of women's figure skating teetered on the brink of oblivion in the Winter Olympics. Picture, if you will, a frost-kissed world in the 1920s, where the Olympics were still an unruly teenager, tussling to find its place in the world of international sports. These early Winter Games, as unpredictable as they were frosty, posed a grand stage for epic adventures and comedic misadventures. Imagine a young, statuesque figure skater wiping the snow from her costume as if preparing to take flight on razor-thin blades. Her determined gaze, a contrast to the wintry winds that whispered objections to any such athletic grace. The audience, bundled in row upon row of wool coats, awaited the spectacle with anticipation, while skeptics grumbled from the sidelines, barely suppressing smirks beneath their mustaches. But let us delve into the rough and tumble of the 1920s, an era as charming as it was chaotic. The fourth official Olympic Winter Games were held in Chamonix, France in 1924, though they were more akin to a glorified ice festival than the continental grandeur we're accustomed to today. This was, mind you, a time before the games were polished into perfection, like a diamond beneath the jeweler's careful eye. And yet, women's figure skating was already dancing to a complicated tune. Its early days were fraught with drama and intrigue more befitting a Shakespearean play. Without the tragic stabbings, of course. It wasn't the competitions that posed the main challenge, but the competition to even be included as a sport. For you see, in the whimsical world of early Olympic planning, women's events were often shelved next to synchronized knitting and ice fishing. But let us not dwell too long on jests, for there was an earnestness to these athletic endeavors. Despite the backdrop of chilly adversity, or perhaps because of it, audacious women skaters glided forth with a defiant flurry. It was their perseverance that transformed the icy terraces into the stuff of legend. One prominent figure was Sonja Henie, a Norwegian pixie and a pivotal character amid this frozen tableau. Henie twirled onto the Olympic stage in 1924 as something of a wunderkind. Picture a 15-year-old with the poise of royalty, paired with the boundless energy of youth. Her early debut seemed like folly to some, but this ambitious skater swiftly glided onto the scene, sculpting her legacy on the very ice in question. Henie's efforts were underscored by all manner of political and social barriers, like a theatrical iceberg lurking beneath the surface. The narrative behind the scenes was full of tussling National Olympics committees, all singing from different hymn sheets, in several languages, no less. Each had their interpretations of the rules, battling for dominance and proving that yes, even back then, paperwork was truly a sport in itself. Amidst this tangle of cultural intrigue, Henie's charm and undeniable skill helped to propel the sport into the public consciousness, making it not just a beloved spectacle, but a capitalized event. The shift from occasional oddity to embrace celebration was akin to turning a frenetic snowstorm into a serene landscape. Although Henie didn't win in 1924, full disclosure, dear listener, she placed last. Her unfaltering resolve planted seeds for future victories. Women's figure skating was not merely a contender vying for scores, but a stubborn blossom refusing to be buried by the wintry world. Each graceful spin and enchanting pose became indelible threads woven into the tapestry of Olympic history, one stitch at a time. And so, the story of how women's figure skating nearly didn't survive the early Winter Games is a tale of tenacity wrapped in a delicate blend of humor, resilience, and artistry. The perseverance of these pioneering women ensured that what could have been an asterisk in history's margins became a triumph celebrated around the globe. Now, as the snows of memory settle quietly around us, let us beckon dreams of sequins and snowflakes to join us on our gentle journey into slumber. For the story continues, and in the next chapter we shall glide ever forward, all while stay tucked beneath the warm covers of time. In the dimly lit corner of history, where the past dustily dances with nostalgia, women's figure skating almost left the rink crumbed into oblivion during the early Winter Games. Imagine, if you will, the year is 1936, and the Winter Olympics has taken its stopover in Garmisch-Partenkirchen, a town that sounds like a charming sneeze. Indeed, it was a time when the snow was crisp, the air was biting, and the ice held tails that glided more smoothly than a well-oiled Zamboni. The essence of this beloved sport skated on thin ice against the backdrop of an era dotted with global upheaval and dazzling display. Women then weren't exactly encouraged to lasso up their skates and pirouette their way into athletic fame. Instead, they were expected to daintily sip tea and blush over embroidery mishaps. But some trailblazing skate collectors decided that frozen ponds offered a better canvas than linen napkins. Enter Sonja Henie, the illustriously pirouetting Norwegian skater who was by this time a 3-time Olympic champion. Henie had made it blindingly evident that the sport was as captivating as it was competitive. With a twinkle in her eye and a twirl in her skirt, Sonja managed to cajole the world into understanding that figure skating was neither a mere dalliance nor a frosty reprieve. No, it was an art worth its own Olympic pedestal. Yet, trouble hovered like a cautious cloud as financial burdens and logistical nightmares plagued the Olympic Committee. Think of it as a historical kitchen disaster where you couldn't tell your soufflé from your bolognese. Everything needed to rise up but furrowed into chaos instead. They began viewing women's events as logistical cobwebs since resources were tight, and time was a fickle mistress. There were whispers, hushed as the glide of a blade's edge on ice, suggesting the elimination of the women's event, a move more chilling than even the iciest of double axles. But history had more threads to weave with the chilling yarn of diplomacy and determined champions of sport. The International Skating Union, not one to let good ice go to waste, argued passionately that the athletic grace of these women was far too valuable to be scrapped like errant snowflakes. In a boardroom less cozy and far chillier than a moose's wintry snooze, Persuasion pirouetted through budgets, and compromise arrived gracefully on muted blades of practicality. Inspired by Haney and pushed by determined federations, allies of women's figure skating poured their ardor into the argument with more flair than a well-placed footwork sequence. They unfurled plans that transformed logistical tangles into seamless strides and soon set the stage for the sport not just to survive. Oh no. It would sparkle and shine like a freshly polished skate on game day. Meanwhile, the world looked on, entranced not just by the intricate lacing on boots, nor only by the beading on costumes that twinkled like constellations. No, it was the courage and expressiveness of women carving dreams into ice, crafting stories with each twirl that etched their places into the annals of history. A history where it was crucial to understand that endurance on cold rinks mirrored the resilience needed in life's own slalom. However, as lights dimmed over that historic rink setting, a whisper of a snowflake seemed to dance joyously downwards, signaling solace and support from the cosmos above. Women's figure skating wasn't just a sport. It was a lyrical rebellion, a cry for freedom gracefully done with gracefully pointed toes, demanding to be etched into the Olympic tapestry forevermore. And as this pivotal, candid skate became a lesson that echoes in comforting rhymes of bygone bells, new eras beckoned, eagerly embracing what once almost disappeared into frosty translucence. Dreamy trails carved out by confident blades hinted at a future chapter of this icy classic, leaving us at the gentle cusp of an evolution whose heart whispered with the echo of a quiet, resolute promise that the show must indeed go on. Glorious, jaw-dropping, and utterly mesmerizing. In the echo of these turns and tales, a hint of a new stir, as refreshing yet as elusive as the scent of lavender wafting in a cool breeze, summons onward into the depths of this night, where stories serenade in whispers and dreams await to be sculpted ever anew, as we continue to swirl gracefully through the history of women's Olympic figure skating, finding ourselves in the cozy, otherworldly ambience of 1936. We encounter a rare gem, a moment in time where figure skating did not merely glide onto the ice, but did so with a perhaps unintended comedic flair. Picture, if you will, an era when ski jumps looked like DIY projects and hockey matches often came with a free show of spontaneous snowball fights. At the 1936 Winter Olympics, held in the picturesque town of Garmisch-Partenkirchen in Germany, a collection of the world's most daring, and occasionally flummoxed, figure skaters assembled. The town's name alone sounds like the kind of incantation a wizard might use to conjure warm socks on a chilly day. The rink was set against the stunning backdrop of the Bavarian Alps, a sight so beautiful it even made the ice blush a little. This was a time when women's figure skating costumes consisted of long skirts that seemed to operate under the curious ambition of wanting to participate in windsurfing, but on ice. The long skirts were, as you can imagine, not exactly aerodynamically engineered, thus doubling as portable snow shovels during any rigorous spins. Among the skaters was the famous Sonja Henie, the Norwegian marvel who turned figure skating from a sport into a sparkling, skittering art form. Henie won her third consecutive Olympic gold medal that year, bedazzling audiences with her precision and grace, while likely wondering if anyone had noticed how her choreographed triple toe loop had accidentally scooped up a collection of snow and perhaps a small squirrel along the way. As Henie spun and looped, the audience watched in awe, or perhaps mild thermal stress, as snow drifted gently around them like a sprinkling of powdered sugar, attempting to sweeten an already delightful spectacle. And yet, the most extraordinary thing about this time was not merely the artistic performances, but the stories that skated softly under the radars of history. While Henie dazzled above the ice, below its surface, the Olympic Committee wrestled with some rather curious infrastructure issues. Some forward thinkers faced indecisive thermostats which whimsically toggled the rink from a surprise splash pool to a well-chilled kiddie pool, depending on their mood. Behind the scenes, a troupe of engineers regularly plunged sticks into the ice to test its thickness, inadvertently adopting calf-deep soaks into Arctic spa treatments, which we assure you was not in any self-care manual of the time. The ice was consistently at risk of melting at the slightest provocation of warm weather or an exuberant curling broom, no doubt leaving the organizing committee scratching their heads and wondering how to safeguard a precious ice rink that seemed more temperamental than an artist deprived of their morning coffee. And here comes the humorous twist of history, the quirks that remind us that even the grandest stage can have a giggle-worthy backstage drama. As almighty as the Alps felt hovering overhead, protecting this icy endeavor with all seriousness, not even they could prevent a small but unexpectedly non-slip incident from taking place. Yes, there was a moment when, in a case of mistaken eccentricity, Zamboni-free ice grooming involved a rather traditional seaweed rake, a borrowing from summer beach cleanup routines. Yet through it all, the athletes soldiered on, wrapping themselves not just in courage, but in the kind of charm only true passion can weave. Despite the unpredictable ice and the whims of extreme weather surprises, the women figure skaters spun dreams into all our imaginations, cementing their place in Olympic glory as they carved their futures on icy canvases. As we drift toward the gentle finale of this chapter, one can't help but imagine these marvelously resilient women, whose every leap and edge was not merely a feat of athletic prowess, but also a delightful dance with fate itself. Tucked away in their jackets made from alpaca wool, quaintly protected. Against the chill, these pioneering skaters glided their way into our hearts and the enduring narrative of the Olympic Games. But dear dreamer, let us not dwell too long on frozen ponds and vintage rinks, as the moon peeks through gaps in frosty clouds, carrying the promise of a new chapter soon to dawn. Let's rest in the gentle knowledge that every step on that icy journey rings with laughter and warmth, as the snowflakes gently fluttered down from the skies like a winter symphony. The early years of women's Olympic figure skating were no less enchanting, although they were accompanied by a somewhat comedic cacophony of chaos. Back in those days, the sporting event was held in a whimsical world where triple axels were yet to soar and double loops were considered delightfully daring. It was a landscape filled with skaters who glided delicately onto the scene, their costumes more flapper than function, and skates that clung to the ice as if they had a life of their own. Picture this. In 1924, during a most historic Winter Olympics in Chamonix, the women's singles figure skating appeared for the very first time. Our heroines took to the ice in skirts that seemed more suitable for a Charleston dance-off than a sporting competition. These pioneering ladies skated with bravery and grace, undeterred by the odd loose sequin or inconvenient snowdrift, a testament to their multifaceted talents, if you will. The cast of characters forming this icy ballet was rather eclectic. Most notable among them was Sonja Hennig, an 11-year-old Norwegian prodigy who had ambition written all over her pirouettes, despite finishing last. Her skates, so often rebellious, probably needed a few stern words after refusing to cooperate during her performance. But like any good figure skating story, Hennig's would soon be spun into gold, though not here, not quite yet. Then there was an Englishwoman, Ethel Muckelt, whose glamorous curls sailed alongside her as she wove across the Utz's ice. Ethel, not simply content with shaking up the ice rink, was known for her spirited personality off the rink. She once, rather cheekily, suggested that figure skating needed a touch more danger to entice audiences. Perhaps a suggestion to introduce the yet unrealistic, but oh so dramatic, flaming hoops or dodging synchronized polar bears. One can only imagine. Add to this mix a Frenchwoman, André Joly, whose paths of elegance resembled embroidered Parisian lace across the ice. However, the subtle art of keeping one's hat securely perched upon one's coif during a triple lutz was a skill yet refined. The struggles were real and somewhat humorous. Hats flew like startled birds, perhaps insistent on creating graceful distractions of their own, and so adjustments mid-performance became an athlete's additional act of skill. But amidst the snow and spills of Chamonix, there was no denying the electric buzz of excitement surrounding women's skate, just an overwhelmingly loud tap on the glass ceiling of international sports. even as rinkside spectators tilted their heads in familiar confusion, resembling penguins with perfectly good reasons to ponder. It seemed that a sense of awe, layered beneath heavy coats and scarves, warmed the hearts assembled there. The swirling stories of youth and ambition, sassy skirts, and wayward headwear gave birth to a legacy to be sculpted through many a winter night. An art truly redefining sport, which even in its infancy held on fiercely to dreams of aplomb. Although the Winter Olympics didn't quite know it then, a stage was being set for future galaxies of greatness and grace. No reviews gathered or medals garnered could fully encapsulate it, but it was there, a simple majesty waiting to grow. As the din of the early figure skating circus quieted to gentle applause, the chapter on stone-written struggles faded behind the scenes, allowing the gentle glide of progress to ensue. Women's figure skating had arrived, perhaps a little late to the winter party, but with enough swoosh and glitter to last for decades, with each decade patiently waiting to carve its own story into the icy annals of history. And as this temperate tale pirouettes toward its gentle close, we look to the forward ice sheet ahead, a layer of crystalline potential, just waiting to see how it will shape the skates of tomorrow. So nestle deep into the covers, allowing thoughts to unfurl like yesterday's dreams. For the night has not yet taken his final bow, and rumor has it that the chapters of this dreamy encore have only just begun. Picture this. It's as if we've entered a world of swirling ice, soft lantern lights, and the gentle shuffling of skate blades on frozen lakes. Welcome to the early 20th century, where the notion of women's figure skating gliding into the Olympic spotlight faced more hurdles than a squirrel navigating a curling rink. Our cozy tale begins in 1908 at the London Summer Games. Yes, you heard. That right, Summer Games. Apparently, the committee thought, why wait for winter when you can just pretend it's chilly? And so, amidst sun-soaked arenas, figure skaters danced on artificial ice, defying both seasonal logic and gravity. At the heart of this sport's evolution stood a steadfast cadre of women who, with each graceful leap and pirouette, gave the notion of breaking the ice new meaning. One such enchanting figure was Madge Sayers, clad in a modest ankle-length gown, turning elegant spins into steadfast statements that whispered, "Why, yes, gentlemen, we do belong here." Madge twirled her way to gold, leaving in her wake a trail of awestruck spectators and a few bewildered geese that had wandered onto the rink, presumably pondering their migration choices. As the weather slowly accepted its winter destiny, we fast forward to the Chamonix Winter Games of 1924, a veritable festival of frost and frolic. By now, women's figure skating had begun carving its rightful niche in the icy tapestry of Olympic history. Hailing from Norway, the exquisite Sonja Henie arrived, barely old enough to stay up for dessert, with her enchanting charm and dedication. Sonja's performances were so bewitching, even the snowmen occasionally stopped staring wistfully at passing sleds to catch a glimpse of Henie's glissading genius. Each event had set the stage for a dreamscape of harmonious gliding. But like all epic tales, this one was peppered with dilemmas more slippery than a thinly frozen pond. Judges, notoriously stingy with points, adopted a method reminiscent of goldfish memory, inconsistent, baffling, yet somehow endearing. Over time, methods improved, but not before inadvertently inspiring entire genres of comedic routines, where bemused audiences wondered if the scores were determined by skate size or curling accuracy instead. The advent of women's figure skating wasn't met without a comedic chorus from the critics' corner either. In retroactive wisdom, their crumpled notes and disgruntled editorials read like cryptic prophecy, predicting doom by slipper boots. "Skating in sports," they bristled. "Next, you'll tell us they'll let women vault over bars." Fortunately, for Olympic history buffs, their scathing words went the way of poorly packed sandwiches come picnic time, lost among more preferred delicacies. As we meander through this icy narrative, it becomes clear that Olympic women's figure skating endured the chaos of early misunderstandings and emerged as a polished gem. With careful strokes of artistry and precision, skaters transformed the ice rinks of early games into stages of burgeoning empowerment. The graceful glides upon crystalline stages transcended sport. They wove new chapters into the story of societal progress. And so, dear dreamer, as we drift further into this sleepy reverie, imagine the soft sounds of snowy winds carrying tales of triumph. For in the humble history of women's Olympic figure skating, we find not just a sport, but a testament to resilience, and perhaps the secret to effortlessly pirouetting into our dreams. As we gently sweep into the next chapter, feel the comforting whispers of bygone eras inviting you onwards, a sleigh ride into cozy unknowns and further tales spinning on the ice of history. In the whimsical world of figure skating, imagine yourself transported back to the 1930s, where the air was as crisp as an apple bitten by the bite of winter days. Imagine yourself in St. Moritz, where the snowflakes floated lazily down like tiny, confused postcards lost in transit. Picture a time when an elegant swoop of a skate blade could silence a crowd, unless, of course, they were too busy gasping for breath in the frigid alpine air. In the frozen amphitheaters of those early Winter Olympics, a peculiar enchantment came to life on the ice. It was a grand stage where grace met grit, and where beautiful chaos unfolded with every spiraling sam twirl. Among the maestros of the rink, one particularly fascinating character was Cecilia College, a young British prodigy out to make history, or as she might whimsically muse, a jolly good fairy tale. Now, Cecilia, bless her knitted stockings, wasn't just there to skate. She was there to revolutionize, to usher the world into a new age of figure skating, where spins and jumps would tell tales and make audiences swoon. Of course, swooning from the difficulty was not recommended. It was too cold for theatrics. Cecilia had a penchant for the dramatic. Her triple spins and daring jumps were no ordinary spectacles. She placed her own distinct stamp on the ice, much like an ambitious goose prints its path across a snowy field, albeit more artistically and less about finding breadcrumbs. But let's gently sidestep over to another part of the rink, the judges, those turret-like figures with clipped moustaches and monocles, whose expressions remained as firm as frozen puddles. Sometimes, they made decisions so bewilderingly confusing, one could only suspect they were secretly inventing points as they went along, like a spirited game of dress-up hide-and-seek. These arbiters of ice seemed to hold not just the scores, but the very essence of possibility in their heavy notebooks and stern postures. Cecilia knew, oh how she knew, that in these early days of competition, women's figure skating was teetering like a doll on a delicate point. Critics often debated its legitimacy, claiming it was more pom-pom and pizzazz than athletic prowess. Oh, the audacity! It was a time when skating backwards could turn doubters into believers, a real slippery slope. It was Cecilia's graceful determination and those daring, soul-stirring spirals that punctuated each moment with a wink to the incredulous, as if to say, "Dear observers, I assure you, this is as real and delightful as my very best cup of English tea." And so it was. With each leap that defied gravity's furrowed brow, Cecilia and her contemporaries shaped the art form, sketched bold new lines on nature's vibrant ice canvas, and challenged the very idea of what a woman could accomplish on a pair of skates. Much like a snowstorm that gathers strength, they weathered doubt from all corners, floating dreams on blades with a mischievous twinkle in their eyes. Their saga danced on, despite the critiques, despite the weathered old boys' clubs, and the occasional calendar snafu that saw some unfortunate scheduling clashes with synchronized snowman building competitions. A testament to the undying spirit of these pioneering athletes, figure skating by women in the Winter Games not only survived, but thrived, spinning ever faster toward the horizon of lexicon and law. As history moves forward and tales intertwine like skaters' hands in a duet, this chapter of women's figure skating echoes timelessly, its soulful melody a warm lullaby to those who dream on, past Olympic rinks and into our quiet reflections. A gentle reminder, dear listener, that sometimes the grace of persistence is a force more powerful than we dare to calculate. And as we drift into the soft folds of the blanket of night, we leave Cecilia, glowing ethereally, as if the ice danced with her, leaving behind a tapestry of dreams and worlds, inviting us kindly into the forthcoming endeavors and misadventures of the games. As we drift through the icy corridors of history to the 1930s, it's worth noting that the scene at the women's figure skating rinks was akin to a royal court on a frozen pond. These rinks, you see, were not just arenas for sport but magnificent theatres where the elite of the athletic world waltzed, not without a hint of drama and cunning, of course. It was during this decade that an array of noble personalities, at least by silhouette, glided gracefully across the world's nascent winter sporting stage. Take, for instance, Sonja Henie, whose name is not just whispered in Olympic halls, but practically etched into the ice. By the time she graced the Lake Placid Olympics in 1932, she had already enveloped herself in a frosty veil of myth. At just 20 years old, she was as much a spectacle off the ice as on it. Attendees were often found puzzling over the riddle of her gleaming costumes, crafted with such meticulousness you might believe them enchanted, capable of unraveling blizzards with a single twirl. Sonja had a technique that melted more than just the ice cap beneath her skates. She brought a Hollywood-style panache to figure skating, turning competitions into theatrical performances. Rumor has it that judges found themselves so enchanted by her pirouettes that they sometimes forgot they held in their hands the means to alter the outcome of the competition. One can't entirely fault them. It's rather hard to focus on numbers when witnessing a snow fairy at play. Interestingly, as Sonja took the globe in a glittering snowstorm of charisma, whispers emerged from the shadows of the skate world. Could it be, some wondered, that her style was overshadowing traditional skating artistry? As with any good tale involving snow and prowess, the debate was frosty but conducted with proper decorum, as seems to befit those dressed for an extravagant midwinter gala. In the embers of the 1936 Winter Olympics in Garmisch-Partenkirchen, Germany, Sonja Henie struck again, claiming a third consecutive Olympic gold and, unbeknownst to her, a pivotal role in the ongoing saga of the sport. This woman's dazzling performances triumphed once again, but they also sparked a question that lingered in the cooling air. What then should the future hold for women's figure skating? Was it to be an athletic endeavor or an art form poised at the border of reality, bending toward illusion? Petite debates aside, it turned out that Sonja Henie's legacy was more robust than iced-over philosophical tussles. Her influences ran deep, inspiring a generation to carve their dreams meticulously onto frozen canvases. And yet, listeners, as you nestle deeper into your cocoon of blankets, here is where our tale takes a peculiar turn. How remarkably similar it all seemed to a dance one might find in a hushed ballroom, with Jerome Robbins-like precision and Elizabethan whimsy. You see, after Sonja, others followed, twinkling across ice stages, adding threads to the tapestry she wove, not with yarn, of course, but with whispers of embellished snow and promises of the future. Figures like Barbara Ann Scott and Peggy Fleming would later glide along the pathways Henie paved, their skates slicing through questions of what the sport could be. The battle for the heart of women's figure. Skating continued rhythmically, a kind of fugue of form and spectre, like gentle verses brushed across fresh snow. It was a debate of delicate power between elegance, tradition, and a hunger for marvel. Who would have believed that within the cold embrace of winter lay a struggle not just of motion, but a story of poetic survival? As you breathe in the silence punctured only by the faint crunch of snowflakes under skate blades in your imagination, consider how these moments in history stirred dreams anew in the hearts of everyone who yearned to sketch their destiny upon an arena not made of turf or track, but of glistening ice. With that gentle squeeze of historical levity, we ease our way toward another chapter of our tale, where snowbound dreams and athletic aspirations continue their whimsical dance in the winter's twilight. In the frosty glow of the early Olympic Games, women's figure skating found itself teetering on a blade's edge, caught between tradition's murky hold and the dazzling shimmer of modernity. Painted against a backdrop of swirling snowflakes and breathless anticipation, the story of how these brave skaters nearly spun their last pirouette before falling into Olympic obscurity is as enchanting as it is filled with unexpected twirls and giggles. Picture, if you will, a time when women skaters garbed themselves in more fabric than a small caravanserais tent just to ward off the sharp bite of the winter wind. Each layer was an added kilo during a performance, tactically swathing competitors in a cocoon that barely allowed a twinkle of knee to escape. This attire served more as a nod to Victorian modesty than to aerodynamic efficiency, leading one to wonder how double axles didn't turn into dizzying cocoons of cotton. The early 1900s was a period when skating and women in sport, in general, drew raised eyebrows more often than cheers. Indeed, figure skating was to become an Olympic sport for women at the 1908 London Games, yet just as warmly accepted as a snowball inside a well-stoked fireplace. Notably, the first women's figure skating champion, then often seen swanning about the ice, was actually a delightful fervor named Madge Sayers. Draped in fabric and determination, Madge glided into the stone-cold hearts of the doubters, proving once and for all that grace knows no gender. Specifically, she tiptoed past both societal skepticism and literal chilly landscapes to scoop up the very first Olympic gold in ladies skating, leaving more than a few respectable gentlemen muttering into their moustaches. With each perfectly timed leap, women like Madge couldn't imagine that behind her elegantly twirling figure lay a shadow of uncertainty. A shadow cast not by her own performance, somewhat like a diligent lamplighter extinguishing the lamps behind her. For what Madge didn't realize was that in those times, sports for women were often seen as an extracurricular dalliance, much akin to learning how to cha-cha in the confines of a drawing room. The forces of tradition, it seemed, were ready to shuffle women's figure, skating back under the rug of convention, while the progressive voices rallied on. The story could have easily ended there, with a triumphant but singular victory. However, marching through history like firm frozen snow, the frost fairies of figure skating seemed determined to etch their legacy deeper in the icy archives. Following pioneers like Madge came Sonia Henny, a veritable force of nature who wouldn't hear a word against her going toe-pick to toe-pick against the odds. By her third Winter Olympics, Sonia was a 3-time consecutive gold medalist and an undeniable star, defying an entire era's deflated narrative with every sequined stride. The story of women's figure skating at the Olympics is best likened to the choreography of a salcho, seemingly calm but rich with tension underneath, a paradox of cool control and the imminent threat of a stumble into oblivion. The zealous, if somewhat jumbled dance of progress plunged and leapt across competition rinks to endear women's figure skating surely into the realm of unmissable, becoming a mainstay that the Games simply couldn't bear to lose. Somewhere between icy pirouettes and electric fanfare, between challenging tradition and re-envisioning the possible, the women who dazzled the rink cha-cha'd from dim annals into the seemingly unshakable spotlight of Olympic lore. So, as we gently glide, mind the spread eagle, toward our next and final chapter, let's quietly marvel at how a medley of modest beginnings and audacious audacity transformed women's figure skating into the spectacular sport it is today. As we prepare to drift into the restful whispers of the night, let's cherish how history on ice, like a delicate snowflake, defies the fleeting generational gusts to linger long in our dreams. As we whisper our way into the cozy tapestry of the final chapter, picture this. The winter air is crisp, carrying with it a medley of giggles, complaints about tight boots, and perhaps the faint tinkling of a cowbell, not calling cattle, but cheering on the icy stage of the early Olympic Games. Against this frosty backdrop, imagine a stage where grace meets gravity, courage joins with clumsiness, and our intrepid heroines of figure skating curtsy to the world, an audience half expecting them to fall majestically into a pile of snow. It's hard to believe now, with figure skating being the glittering spectacle it is, that it nearly tumbled out of the Olympic spotlight before it even had a proper chance to lace up its skates. Back in the less lustrous days of the early 20th century, critics of women's participation in the sport fretted about nonsense such as the integrity of femininity being bruised by an errant triple axel or the terror of ankles exposed in woolen tights. Shocking, I know. Yet it was precisely in this climate that our skaters emerged, defiant and dexterous, each pirouette a rebellion, every spin a stand against the prevailing winds of the stodgy status quo. This time was more about gauge than glide, more muster than mutter in the grand rinks of history. And let's not forget the comedic attire, costumes that weighed more than the athletes themselves, leaving everyone wondering whether they were watching a sport or a sartorial endurance test, as spins became slow-motion windmills of wool and sequins. There was Sonja Hennie, Norway's whirling prodigy, who waltzed onto the scene, wearing a historically shorter skating dress to better show off her moves and leave fans gasping, not only for air in frozen stands, but at the daring sight of her knees. The barrage of tut-tutting quivered through the rinks like an unsure double axle, with faint murmurs of disapproval dissolving into roaring applause as Hennie pirouetted into the hearts of admirers worldwide. Magically, the ice was more than just a slippery playground. It became a stage where stories were written with blades instead of quills, with crescendos and cadences performed by genteel gliding tucks. And as victories and mishaps warmed the rink, the idea that women could or should delicately skate off into oblivion flickered and fizzled like frosty breath in the wintry light. Despite early hurdles, or shall we say frosty hiccups, these early skaters sealed their legacy not just with their medals, but with the frostbitten resolve that stood cheekily against skepticism. Their laughter, fortitude, and occasional collision with the ice brought the enduring charm of human falter to a world craving perfected grace. As we gently glide to the end of our tale, let's tuck the story into the bed of history where it belongs, fluffed with the wonder of beginnings and the nostalgia of snowy yesterdays. The gentle scraping of blades, the sound of cheering from bundled crowds, and the brave chit-chat of the skaters themselves merge seamlessly into a harmonious lullaby. As we mark the end of this story, picture the lights dim over the ice, leaving the glistening echoes of these early heroines who danced upon history's thin ice, ensuring women's figure skating pirouetted past the hesitant beginnings and spun into the grand spectacle we enjoy today. Now, dear listener, rest easy in the realm of dreams where history dances quietly, knowing that women's Olympic figure skating not only survived, but thrived, carving elegant etchings into the frosted annals of time, one gentle glide at a time. With eyes slowly closing, ice dreams softly await,